My name is Marcus Thornfield, and I've been living alone on my ranch in the Montana Territory for 8 years. At 35, I'd grown accustomed to the solitude, the harsh winters, and the unforgiving landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction, but nothing could have prepared me for the blizzard of February 1887, or for what or rather who it would bring to my doorstep. The storm had been building for days. I could feel it in my bones, the way the air pressure dropped, and the wind began to howl through the mountain passes. My cattle were restless, huddling together in whatever shelter they could find, and even my horses seemed nervous, stamping and snorting in their stalls. I'd spent the morning securing everything I could, checking the barn doors, bringing in extra firewood, making sure my water barrels wouldn't freeze. Living this far from civilization, you learn to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The nearest town, Copper Falls, was a full day's ride away in good weather, and in a storm like this, it might as well have been on the other side of the world. By afternoon, the snow was falling so thick I could barely see the barn from my cabin window. The wind was fierce, creating drifts that reached halfway up my door. I'd seen storms before, but this one felt different, meaner, more determined to bury everything in its path. I was sitting by my fireplace, reading an old newspaper and listening to the wind tear at my roof, when I heard something that made me freeze. It was faint, almost lost in the howling of the storm, but unmistakable, the sound of a horse's whinny. High and panicked, I set down my paper and listened more carefully. There it was again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like a human voice calling out. My blood ran cold. No one should be out in weather like this. Anyone caught in this blizzard would be dead within hours. I grabbed my heavy coat, hat, and gloves, then took down my rifle from above the mantel. Not because I expected trouble, but because in weather like this, you never knew what desperate animals, two-legged or four-legged, might come looking for shelter. The moment I opened my door, the wind nearly knocked me backward, snow stung my face like needles, and I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. I called out, my voice swallowed almost immediately by the storm. "Hello, anyone there?" I heard the horse again, definitely closer now, and what sounded like sobbing. Following the sound, I pushed through the knee-deep snow, using my fence line as a guide. The cold was brutal, cutting through my heavy clothes like they were made of paper. Then I saw them. A horse, a beautiful bay mare, stood trembling near my barn, her reins tangled in my fence wire. She was covered in snow and ice, her breath coming in great white puffs, but it was her rider that made my heart stop. Slumped forward in the saddle was a woman, and from what I could see through the swirling snow, she was in bad shape. Her long blonde hair was frozen with ice, and she was wearing what looked like a traveling dress, completely inadequate for this weather. "She wasn't moving, ma'am," I shouted, fighting my way through the snow to reach her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She stirred slightly at the sound of my voice, lifting her head just enough for me to see her face. Even half frozen and barely conscious, she was beautiful, delicate features. Pale skin now blue with cold, and the most striking blue eyes I'd ever seen. But those eyes were glazed with hypothermia and exhaustion. "Help," she whispered, so quietly, I almost didn't hear her over the wind. "Please, ... I didn't hesitate. I reached up and carefully lifted her down from the saddle, shocked by how light she was, how cold her body felt even through her clothes. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. "I've got you," I said, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "You're safe now." Carrying her was difficult in the deep snow, but I managed to get her to my cabin while the wind did its best to knock us both down. I kicked open the door and rushed inside, immediately carrying her to the fireplace. The warmth of the cabin seemed to revive her slightly. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around in confusion. Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You're in my cabin," I said, setting her down gently in the chair closest to the fire. "You were caught in the storm. What's your name?" "Catherine," she managed. "Catherine ... Whitmore." "Well, Catherine Whitmore, you're lucky to be alive. What were you doing out in weather like this?" But she'd already lost consciousness again, her head falling forward. I could see that her lips were blue, her skin was dangerously pale, and she was shivering violently. I'd seen hypothermia before, and I knew she was in serious trouble. I needed to get her warm, and fast. I built up the fire until it was roaring, then went to my bedroom to gather every blanket I owned. When I returned, I could see that her clothes were soaked through the melting snow, and ice had left her dress clinging to her body, and her boots were full of slush. This was going to be awkward, but it was a matter of life and death. I'd have to get her out of those wet clothes. "Catherine," I said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Catherine, I need you to wake up. You need to get out of these wet clothes." Her eyes opened again, but she seemed confused, disoriented. "I'm so cold," she whispered. "I know. That's why we need to get you warm and dry. Can you help me?" She nodded weakly, and with my assistance, she managed to stand on unsteady legs. I helped her remove her soaked coat and boots, then turned my back while she struggled out of her dress. I handed her one of my flannel shirts and a pair of wool socks, both far too big for her but warm and dry. When she was changed, I wrapped her in every blanket I had and settled her back by the fire. Then I went to make some hot coffee and soup, anything to get some warmth into her body. While the coffee brewed, I went back outside to tend to her horse. The mare was in better shape than her rider, but she was still cold and frightened. I led her into my barn, rubbed her down with dry cloths, and gave her hay and oats. She was a fine animal, well-bred and well cared for, which made me wonder even more what Catherine had been doing out in this storm. When I returned to the cabin, Catherine was more alert, though still shivering despite the blankets and the fire. "Thank you," she said as I handed her a cup of hot coffee. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "What were you doing traveling in weather like this?" Catherine's face crumpled, and I could see tears in her eyes. "I was running away," she said quietly. "From what?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft I had to lean forward to hear her. "From my wedding?" I felt my eyebrows rise. "Your wedding? I was supposed to marry Thomas Blackwood tomorrow today, I suppose, given how long I've been traveling. He's a wealthy man, owns half the businesses in Copper Falls. My father arranged the marriage to settle his debts, and you didn't want to marry him." Catherine laughed bitterly. "Thomas Blackwood is 45 years old, has buried 2 wives already, and has a reputation for ... cruelty. But my father owes him a considerable sum of money, and this marriage would clear the debt. So you ran?" I tried to. I thought if I could reach the train station in Millerville, I could disappear, start over somewhere else. But the storm came up so fast, and I got turned around. She shuddered, and not just from the cold. I studied her face in the firelight. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with the kind of refined beauty that spoke of good breeding and education. But there was a strength in her jaw, a determination in her eyes that told me she wasn't just some pampered society girl. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back. My father will be furious, and Thomas, I don't know what he'll do, but I can't marry him. I won't. The storm's not going to let up for days," I said, glancing toward the window where snow was still falling heavily. "You're welcome to stay here until it passes." Catherine looked at me with surprise. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone." "You're someone who was nearly frozen to death in a blizzard?" I said simply. "That's all I need to know. But it wouldn't be proper, me staying here alone with you." I almost laughed at that. "Catherine, you were about to die out there. I think propriety is the least of our concerns right now." She considered this, then nodded. "You're right, of course, and I'm grateful, truly. But I should warn you when this storm ends. There will probably be people looking for me. My father, Thomas, maybe even the sheriff. Being associated with me could bring you trouble. Let me worry about that," I said. "Right now, you need to focus on getting warm and getting your strength back." Over the next few hours, as the storm continued to rage outside, Catherine gradually warmed up and became more talkative. I learned that she was well educated, having attended a finishing school back east, and that she could speak French and play piano. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her to be raised by a father who saw her more as a business asset than a daughter. He never recovered from losing the ranch, she explained as we shared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. He'd been gambling, trying to win back what he'd lost, but he just dug himself deeper into debt. When Thomas offered to clear everything, in exchange for my hand, father saw it as the perfect solution. "And what did you see it as?" "A prison sentence," she said without hesitation. Thomas made it very clear what kind of marriage he expected. I would be his property, nothing more. He told me that his previous wives had learned to be obedient, and that he expected the same from me. The way she said it made my blood run cold. I'd heard stories about Thomas Blackwood, none of them good. He was known for his business ruthlessness, and his treatment of anyone he considered beneath him. "You did the right thing, running," I said. I have ruined my father, probably destroyed any chance of him recovering financially. And now I'm here, imposing on a stranger's kindness with nowhere to go and no way to support myself." "You're not imposing," I said firmly. "And as for the rest, we'll figure something out." Catherine looked at me curiously. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't owe me anything." It was a fair question, and one I wasn't entirely sure how to answer. The truth was, from the moment I'd seen her slumped in that saddle, something had stirred in me that I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was just the protective instinct any decent man would feel towards someone in distress. Or maybe it was something more. "Because it's the right thing to do," I said finally, "and because I know what it's like to be alone." "Are you alone? I mean," I nodded. "My wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her one winter, along with our unborn child. I've been on my own ever since." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "That must have been terrible." It was. For a long time, I thought about leaving this place, starting over somewhere else. But this ranch, this land, it's all I have left of her, so I stayed. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and I found myself oddly grateful for that. Not because I wanted Catherine to be stranded, but because her presence had brought something to life in this cabin that had been dormant for too long. Marcus, Catherine said suddenly. That's your name, isn't it? I heard you say it when you were talking to your horse earlier. That's right, Marcus Thornfield. Marcus, she repeated, as if testing how it sounded. It's a strong name. It was my grandfather's name. He was the one who first settled this land, and you've been here your whole life. Most of it, left for a few years when I was young, saw some of the world, but I always came back. This place gets in your blood. Catherine looked around the cabin, taking in the simple but well-made furniture, the books on the shelves, the photographs on the mantel. It's a good place, she said, peaceful. I can see why you'd want to stay. As the evening wore on, I made up a bed for Catherine, in my spare room, a small space I'd used for storage, but that would serve well enough with some cleaning. She protested that she didn't want to put me out, but I insisted. You need rest, I told her. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. But as I lay in my own bed that night, listening to the storm and knowing that Catherine was just down the hall, I found myself hoping that what comes next wouldn't involve her leaving too soon. For the first time in years, my cabin felt like a home again, and I wasn't ready to give that up. The storm had brought her to me, but I was already dreading the day it would end, and she would have to decide where to go from here. All I could do was hope that when that time came, she might choose to stay. I woke before dawn to the sound of silence. After 3 days of howling wind and driving snow, the sudden quiet was almost unsettling. I lay in bed for a moment, listening, then got up and looked out my window. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Drifts reached nearly to my windowsills, and everything was covered in a pristine white blanket that sparkled in the early morning light. My first thought should have been relief that the worst was over. Instead, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The end of the storm meant that Catherine would soon have to make decisions about her future, decisions that might take her away from here. I dressed quietly and went to the kitchen to start the coffee, trying not to wake her. But when I passed her door, I could hear movement inside, and a few minutes later, she emerged, wearing the same oversized flannel shirt and wool socks I'd given her that first night. Good morning, she said softly. The storm stopped. Yes, I replied, handing her a cup of coffee. Finally, we stood together at the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from my neighbor's chimney, the first sign of life I'd seen from the outside world in days. It's beautiful, Catherine said. I've never seen so much snow. Where are you from originally? California. My father moved us to Montana when I was 16, after he lost the ranch I mentioned, but even here, I've never seen a storm like that. They don't come often, but when they do, they're memorable. Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, I suppose people will be able to travel again soon. In a day or two, once the main roads are cleared, which means they'll be looking for me. I turned to study her face. She looked better than she had that first night. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were clear and alert. But I could see the worry there, the uncertainty about what came next. Are you ready to face that? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to keep running, to get as far away from here as possible. But another part of me is tired of running. I've been running from one thing or another my whole life. What do you mean? Catherine sat down at my small kitchen table, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth. When my mother died, I ran into books and studies, trying to escape the grief. When my father lost everything, I ran into the fantasy that someone would rescue us. When I realized what kind of man Thomas Blackwood really was, I ran into the storm. Sometimes running is the smart thing to do. Is it? Or is it just cowardice? I sat down across from her. Catherine, what you did took courage. You chose an uncertain future over a certain misery. That's not cowardice. But look where it's gotten me. I'm stranded in a stranger's cabin with no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go. You're alive, I pointed out. And you're free to make your own choices. That's more than you had 3 days ago. She smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her. You have a way of putting things in perspective, Marcus Thornfield. Over the next few days, as we waited for the roads to become passable, Catherine and I fell into an easy routine. She insisted on helping with the household chores, cooking meals, and mending clothes with a skill that spoke of good training. I taught her how to care for the animals and showed her around the ranch. What surprised me most was how naturally she took to the work. I'd expected a woman of her background to be helpless with manual labor, but she proved me wrong. She learned quickly, asked intelligent questions, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. You're a natural at this, I told her one afternoon, as we worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the storm. I like it, she said, surprising me. There's something satisfying about working with your hands, seeing immediate results from your efforts. It's different from the life you're used to. That's exactly why I like it. In my father's house, in the society I grew up in, everything was about appearances, about maintaining facades. This is real. As we worked, we talked. Catherine told me about her childhood in California, about her mother who had been a teacher, before marriage, about her dreams of traveling and seeing the world. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told anyone in years about my wife Sarah, about the early days of building the ranch, about the loneliness that had become my constant companion. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Catherine said when I told her about Sarah. She had this way of making everything seem possible. Even when times were hard, she could find joy in the smallest things: a wildflower, a beautiful sunset, a letter from her sister back east. "Do you think she would have liked me?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" Catherine blushed slightly. "I don't know. I suppose I was wondering what she would think of you helping a stranger, taking me in the way you have." I considered the question seriously. Sarah had a soft heart for anyone in trouble. She was always bringing home strays, injured animals, people down on their luck. She would have insisted we help you, and she would have liked your spirit. My spirit. The way you stood up for yourself, refused to accept a life you didn't want. Sarah was like that. She never let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't do. That evening, as we sat by the fire after dinner, Catherine brought up the subject I'd been dreading. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "All right. What happens when the road's clear? I can't stay here indefinitely, and I can't go back to my father. I have no money, no skills that would allow me to support myself in town. What am I supposed to do?" I'd been thinking about this same question for days, and I'd come to a conclusion that both excited and terrified me. "You could stay here," I said quietly. Catherine stared at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean you could stay here, on the ranch, permanently, as what, your housekeeper? As my wife?" The words hung in the air between us, and I immediately wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Catherine's eyes widened in shock, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. "Marcus," she said finally, "you barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave, intelligent, and kind. I know you're not afraid of hard work, and I know you understand what it means to be alone. But marriage, that's not something to enter into lightly. No, it's not. But Catherine, these past few days, having you here, it's reminded me what it feels like to have a partner, someone to share the work and the worries with. This place has been like a tomb for 6 years. You've brought it back to life." Catherine stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. "What about love, Marcus? Shouldn't marriage be based on love? Shouldn't it be based on respect and compatibility too? On shared values and mutual support?" I stood up and moved closer to her. "Catherine, I care about you. More than I thought possible after just a few days. Maybe it's not the passionate love of storybooks, but it's real, and it's growing." She turned to face me. "And what about my reputation? People will say you married damaged goods, a woman who ran away from her wedding. Let them say what they want. I know who you are, and that's all that matters to me. Thomas Blackwood won't give up easily. He'll see this as theft of his property. Then he'll learn that you were never his property to begin with." Catherine was quiet for a long time, and I could see her weighing the options in her mind. Finally, she spoke. "If I said yes, and I'm not saying I am, what kind of marriage would it be? What would you expect from me?" "I'd expect you to be my partner in every sense of the word. To help run this ranch, to share in the decisions, to be treated as an equal. I'm not looking for a servant or a decoration, Catherine. I'm looking for a companion. And if I can't give you children, what if I'm not capable of being the wife you need? Then we'll face that together, just like we'll face everything else." Catherine studied my face in the firelight, searching for something. "You really mean it, don't you? You'd marry me, knowing nothing about my past except that I ran away from another man. I'd marry you because you had the courage to run away from a man who would have made you miserable, because you've shown me what my life could be like with someone to share it." She was quiet again, and I held my breath, waiting for her answer. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." But even as I said it, I knew that time was something we might not have much of. The roads would be clear soon, and with them would come the outside world, with all its complications and demands. That night, I lay awake thinking about what I'd done. Had I been too forward, too presumptuous? Catherine was vulnerable, dependent on my kindness for her very survival. Was I taking advantage of that vulnerability? But then I thought about the way she'd looked at me when I'd taught her to milk the cow, the way she'd laughed when I'd told her stories about my childhood, way she'd listened with genuine interest when I'd talked about my plans for expanding the ranch. There was something real between us, something that had grown naturally out of shared work and conversation. The next morning, Catherine was quiet during breakfast, and I didn't push her. She had a decision to make, and I knew it wasn't an easy one. She was choosing between the unknown dangers of trying to make it on her own and the unknown complications of tying her life to mine. Around midday, we heard the sound of horses approaching. Catherine went pale, and we both moved to the window to look out. 3 riders were making their way up the path to my cabin, their horses struggling through the deep snow. "Do you recognize them?" I asked. Catherine nodded, her face grim. "One in front is Thomas Blackwood, the other 2 are his men." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. "Stay inside," I told her. "Let me handle this. Marcus, be careful. Thomas is not a man who accepts being told no." I checked my rifle and stepped out onto the porch, watching as the 3 men approached. Thomas Blackwood was exactly what I'd expected, a big man in his 40s with cold eyes and an air of arrogance that preceded him like a bad smell. "You, Thornfield," he called out when he was still 20 yards away. "I am. What can I do for you?" "You can return my property," he said, dismounting from his horse. "I believe you're harboring a woman who belongs to me." "I'm not harboring anyone," I replied calmly. "And I'm certainly not harboring any property. The only woman here is my fiancée." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Your fiancée, that's right. Miss Whitmore has agreed to become my wife." It was a lie, but I hoped Catherine would forgive me for it. Sometimes a man had to make a stand, even when he wasn't sure where he stood. "That's impossible," Blackwood snarled. "Catherine Whitmore is contracted to marry me. Her father signed the papers." "Her father doesn't own her," I said, my voice hardening. "And neither do you." "We'll see about that," Blackwood said, starting toward the cabin. I raised my rifle, not pointing it at him but making it clear I was prepared to use it. "That's far enough." Blackwood stopped, his face red with anger. "You're making a mistake, Thornfield. I have influence in this territory. I can make life very difficult for you." "You're welcome to try," I said, "but right now, you're on my land, and I'm asking you to leave." For a moment, I thought he might try to push past me, but then Catherine appeared in the doorway behind me. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Catherine," Blackwood said, his tone becoming falsely gentle. "There you are. We've been so worried about you. Your father is beside himself." "I'm sure he is," Catherine replied, "but I'm fine. As you can see, this nonsense has gone on long enough," Blackwood said. "Come along now. We have a wedding to prepare for." "No," Catherine said simply. "I won't marry you, Thomas. I've made my choice. Your choice." Blackwood's mask of gentleness slipped. "You don't have a choice. Your father owes me money, and you're how he's going to pay it." "Find another way," Catherine said. "I'm not for sale." Blackwood's face went dark with rage. "You little fool. Do you think this rancher can protect you? Do you think he can give you the life I can?" "He can give me something you never could," Catherine said, stepping closer to me. "He can give me respect." I felt her hand slip into mine, and I squeezed it gently, drawing strength from her courage. "This isn't over," Blackwood said, remounting his horse. "I'll be back with the sheriff. We'll see how brave you both are then." As the three men rode away, Catherine and I stood together on the porch, watching them disappear into the distance. "I'm sorry," I said. "I shouldn't have claimed you were my fiancée without asking." Catherine turned to look at me, and I was surprised to see her smiling. "Actually," she said, "I was about to give you my answer anyway. And yes, Marcus Thornfield, I'll marry you." As I pulled her into my arms, I realized that the storm that had brought Catherine to my door had been the best thing to happen to me in years. Sometimes the worst weather brings the greatest blessings, and sometimes the fire you light for a stranger ends up warming your own heart for a lifetime. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation and planning. Catherine and I knew that Thomas Blackwood would make good on his threat to return, probably with legal backing. So we decided to marry as quickly as possible. A married woman would have more legal protection than a runaway bride, and as my wife, Catherine would be under my protection in ways that even Blackwood's influence couldn't easily challenge. The problem was finding someone to perform the ceremony. The nearest preacher was in Copper Falls, which was Blackwood's territory, and I doubted we'd find a warm welcome there. But Catherine surprised me with a solution. "There's a traveling minister who comes through this area," she said as we discussed our options over breakfast. "Father Mackenzie. He's an old Irish priest who serves the scattered communities out here. My father mentioned him once, said he was one of the few honest men of God he'd ever met. Do you know where to find him? He has a circuit he follows. If I remember correctly, he should be at the O'Malley Ranch about 15 miles south of here, around this time of month." I knew the O'Malley's good people who'd been neighbors for years. If Father Mackenzie was there, I was confident they'd help us. "I'll ride out today and see if I can find him," I said. "I'm coming with you." I started to protest, but Catherine held up her hand. "Marcus, I'm not going to hide here like a frightened rabbit. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it together." She was right, of course. We saddled up both horses and set out across the snow-covered landscape. The ride was difficult, the snow was still deep in places, and we had to pick our way carefully along the mountain trails. But Catherine proved to be an excellent rider, handling her mare with skill and confidence. The O'Malley Ranch was a modest spread nestled in a valley between two ridges. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and I could see cattle huddled in the shelter of the barn. As we approached, Sean O'Malley emerged from the house, his red beard and broad smile unmistakable even at a distance. "Marcus Thornfield," he called out in his thick Irish brogue. "What brings you out on weather like this?" "Hello, Sean. I'm looking for Father Mackenzie. I heard he might be staying with you." "Aye, he is indeed. Come in, come in. You both look half frozen." Sean's wife Bridget welcomed us warmly, immediately setting about preparing hot tea and food. Their three children gathered around, curious about the visitors. It was a scene of domestic happiness that reminded me of what I hoped Catherine and I could build together. Father Mackenzie turned out to be exactly what I'd hoped for, a man in his 60s, with kind eyes, a gentle manner, and the wisdom that comes from years of ministering to people in difficult circumstances. When I explained our situation, he listened without judgment. "So you want to marry this young lady to protect her from a forced marriage to another man?" he said, studying both of us carefully. "Yes, Father, but it's more than that. I care for Catherine deeply, and I believe we can build a good life together. And you, my dear," he said to Catherine, "are you certain this is what you want? Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly, even under difficult circumstances." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Father, I've spent my whole life having decisions made for me by other people. This is the first choice that's truly mine to make, and I'm choosing Marcus." Father Mackenzie smiled. "Then I'll be happy to perform the ceremony. But I have one condition." "What's that?" I asked. "I want you both to spend the evening here, talking with Bridget and Sean about what marriage really means. They've been wed for 15 years and have learned a thing or two about making a partnership work." We agreed, and spent one of the most enlightening evenings of my life listening to the O'Malleys share their experiences. They talked about the importance of communication, of supporting each other through difficult times, of maintaining respect, even during disagreements. "The thing about marriage," Bridget said as we sat around their fireplace, "is that it's not just about love, though that's important. It's about choosing to build something together, day after day, year after year. There'll be times when you don't much like each other," Sean added with a grin, "times when you wonder what you were thinking. But if you're committed to the partnership, you work through it." "What about when outside forces try to tear you apart?" Catherine asked. "Then you stand together," Bridget said firmly. "Whatever comes from outside, you face it as a team. That's what makes you stronger than the sum of your parts." The next morning, Father Mackenzie performed a simple but beautiful ceremony in the O'Malley's parlor. Catherine wore a dress that Bridget had lent her, a simple blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. I wore my best shirt and jacket, feeling more nervous than I had since my first wedding 20 years earlier. "Do you, Marcus, take Catherine to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "Do you, Catherine, take Marcus to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." When Father Mackenzie pronounced us husband and wife, and I kissed Catherine for the first time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for the future. We returned to my ranch nows, a married couple, but we knew our troubles were far from over. Sure enough, 2 days later, Thomas Blackwood returned, this time with Sheriff Morrison and a legal document. "Thornfield," Blackwood shouted from horseback as they approached the cabin, "I have a warrant for the return of stolen property." I stepped out onto the porch, Catherine beside me. "There's no stolen property here, Sheriff." Sheriff Morrison, a decent man I'd known for years, looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, I've got a complaint here that says you're harboring a woman who's contractually obligated to marry Mr. Blackwood." "Sheriff," Catherine said, stepping forward, "I'm Catherine Thornfield now. I married Marcus 3 days ago." Blackwood's face went purple with rage. "That marriage is invalid. She was already contracted to me." "A marriage contract requires the consent of both parties," I said calmly. "Catherine never consented to marry you. Her father consented for her." "Her father doesn't own her," I replied, "and neither do you." Sheriff Morrison examined the marriage certificate that Father Mackenzie had provided. "This looks legitimate to me, Mr. Blackwood. The woman is married to Mr. Thornfield." "This is fraught," Blackwood sputtered. "I'll take this to the territorial court." "You do that?" I said. "But in the meantime, you're trespassing on my land, and I'm asking you to leave." After they left, Catherine and I knew we needed to prepare for a legal battle. Blackwood had money and influence, and he wasn't going to give up. But we also had something he didn't: the support of good people who believed in doing what was right. Over the next few weeks, as we waited for Blackwood to make his next move, Catherine and I settled into married life. It was an adjustment for both of us, learning each other's habits, finding our rhythm as partners. But it felt natural in a way that surprised me. Catherine threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to manage the household accounts, helped with the animals, and even began planning improvements to the cabin. Most importantly, she brought a warmth and energy to the place that had been missing for too long. "You know," she said one evening as we sat by the fire, "I never imagined I could be this happy, even with all the uncertainty about Blackwood. Even with that, Marcus, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The legal challenge came sooner than expected. Blackwood had indeed taken the matter to the territorial court, claiming that Catherine's marriage to me was invalid because she was already under contract to him. The case would be heard in the territorial capital, a 3-day journey from our ranch. "We'll need a good lawyer," I told Catherine as we prepared for the trip. "I know someone," she said. "James Patterson. He was a friend of my mother's family back in California. He moved to Denver a few years ago to practice law. If anyone can help us, it's him." We sent a telegram to Patterson, explaining our situation, and received a reply within 2 days. He would meet us in the territorial capital and represent us. In court, the journey to the capital was long and difficult, but Catherine never complained. She rode beside me with the same determination she'd shown in everything else. Ready to face whatever came next, James Patterson turned out to be a sharp, experienced lawyer with a deep understanding of territorial law. After hearing our story, he was confident we could win. The key issue, he explained, is whether a father has the legal right to contract his adult daughter's marriage without her consent. Territorial law is evolving on this point, and recent cases have favored individual choice over parental authority. The trial lasted 2 days. Blackwood's lawyers argued that Catherine's father had the right to arrange her marriage, and that her flight constituted breach of contract. They painted Catherine as a willful, disobedient daughter who was trying to escape her legal obligations. Patterson countered by arguing that no person could be forced into marriage against their will, regardless of any agreements made by others. He called witnesses who testified to Blackwood's reputation for cruelty and presented evidence of Catherine's father's gambling debts, suggesting that the marriage arrangement was more about settling debts than creating a legitimate union. Most powerful moment came when Catherine herself took the stand. Speaking clearly and calmly, she described her reasons for refusing to marry Blackwood and her decision to marry me instead. "Your Honor," she said, "I understand that my father believed he was acting in my best interests, but I am not property to be traded for the settlement of debts. I am a human being with the right to choose my own path in life. I chose Marcus Thornfield because he treats me as an equal partner, not as a possession." The judge, an elderly man with a reputation for fairness, deliberated for less than an hour before returning with his verdict. In the matter of Blackwood versus Thornfield, he announced, "This court finds that no person can be compelled to enter into marriage against their will, regardless of any agreements made by third parties. The marriage between Marcus Thornfield and Catherine Whitmore Thornfield is valid and legally binding. Case dismissed." As we left the courthouse, Catherine squeezed my hand tightly. "It's really over," she said. "Yes," I replied, "it's over." But as we prepared for the journey home, I realized that while one chapter of our story had ended, another was just beginning. We had won the legal battle, but now we had to build the life we'd fought for. The trip back to the ranch was different from our journey to the capital. There was a lightness in Catherine's manner, a sense of freedom that hadn't been there before. She was truly free now, free from her father's debts, free from Blackwood's threats, free to build the life she wanted. "What are you thinking about?" I asked as we rode through the mountain pass that led to our valley. "I'm thinking about spring," she said. "About planting a garden? Maybe expanding the cabin. About all the things we can do now that we don't have to worry about looking over our shoulders." "And what about children?" I asked, voicing something I'd been thinking about but hadn't dared to mention. Catherine smiled. "I'd like that very much. This ranch needs the sound of children's laughter." As we crested the ridge and saw our cabin in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney where I'd banked the fire before we left, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The storm that had brought Catherine to my door had changed everything, not just for her, but for me as well. I'd lit a fire to warm a stranger, and in doing so, I'd found the warmth that had been missing from my own life. Catherine had been lost in the storm, but in finding her way to my door, she'd helped me find my way back to hope, to love, to the possibility of a future filled with more than just solitude. As we rode up to our home, I knew that, whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The fire I'd lit for her that first night had become the flame that would warm us both for the rest of our lives. The end.